risk. My name is Holly and I'm part of the professional development team here at IIRSM. In this webinar, Mark Woods, Managing Director of Statius Management Services, will explore the models organisations can use to identify the future risks and opportunities they face. Thanks for joining us today, Mark. Before I hand over, there are just a few housekeeping type things that I need to run through first. So to begin with, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar. However, you'll be able to ask questions using the chat function on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Type your questions as you think of them, and then Mark will answer these at the end of his presentation. If you have sound problems, please try, of course, checking the volume, exiting and re-entering the webinar, or join using a telephone, and you'll find instructions on how to do this in your reminder email. And finally, the webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be shared with everyone who's registered for the webinar today and also added to IIRSM's YouTube channel. Right, that's enough from me. Mark, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So as Holly said, my name is Mark Woods and I'm a Director of Statius Management Services. And I'm joining you from sunny Vines Cross in East Sussex. I hope you'll enjoy the session, and I sincerely hope that I'll be able to help with practical tools for the identification of business risk. But first, I think there's a question. Why is this important? So I'd invite you to think about a couple of questions as we progress through this. And we'll come back to these at the end. And additionally, you might like to think about it in two ways. Failure rates for big companies and failure rates for small owner-managed companies. Essentially, this stuff, which is a blend of or fusion of business planning, target and objective setting and risk management, is important because you don't want to be putting up a sign like the one below. So the objective here is really to apply this thinking, use these tools and techniques, and regularly nurture them so you can avoid having to put up a closed sign. So today we're going to keep it quite strategic, and perhaps on another day, perhaps delve deeper into operational risks. But before we start, don't worry about taking notes unless you really want to. We'll make the full slide deck available to download from a landing page along with other handouts and templates we'll reference along the way. Secondly, just to give you a flavour of the clients that we've worked with and perhaps how you might fit into that, some of the big guys include people like Rio Tinto and Anglo American, and GEA, a massive international engineering company. Public sector bodies include people like Epping Forest District Council and Guildford Council, and many of the research centres operating around the country. But our sweet spot is probably ambitious owner-managed 5 to 50 million pound privately owned companies, SMEs, and they range from a two-person paper merchant to a 400 million pound construction group. At this stage, it might also be useful for you to understand our view of any tool or technique. Tools and techniques are things that ought to drive your thinking. It's the thinking that's the key part, and the tools and techniques can and should be used and abused, modified and developed to suit your particular circumstances. So, agenda. What's in it for me? We'll be going through the following. What's in it for me? The process of implementing framework as we describe it, principal tools and techniques, and those are PESTLE analysis, Porter analysis, SWOT analysis, and critical success factors. And given a raft of information is then being generated, having used those processes, we'll then summarise with how to prioritise, and that will be followed with a Q&A. So what's in it for you? Hopefully a robust methodology to pull together a set of tools that will enable you to peek into the future and clarify your thinking, enabling you to develop more resilient responses to future challenges. Potentially, for some new thinking, new tools and techniques, and if not then maybe just reminders and refreshers on old ones. Also, as we'd advocate a teamwork approach to applying these methodologies, hopefully more of a shared responsibility for the future direction of the company or the organisation. But more than all of that, what we want to be able to help you to say is you have delivered better strategies, better systems, better measurement, which is about KPIs, and engaged people delivering better results. The benefits of the approach, slightly different to the what's in it for me approach. We think you'll obviously make up your own mind. There are 4 key benefits to adopting today's approach. One is you get a formalised framework for looking into the future and identifying risks and opportunities. There's also greater integration of risks and opportunities with the strategic direction of the organisation. And the process employed connects changes in the outside world with the actions that the organisation needs to take on its inside world. And given a team approach, you'd also get a better shared vision of what the future might hold and what you need to do about it. And that's important because one study found sharing future plans with employees was one of the few generic business practices that differentiated above average performance from the rest. So before we delve into the detail, it's probably worth a step back and think about the process. I'm pretty sure this is not the only process for looking at risks and opportunities, nor is necessarily in the order everyone will work to, but it is one that we have used a number of times and has worked. So select the team, and in discussing this process exactly a week ago with a potential client, I was suggesting we adopt a lesson I first learned the first time I was a very junior member of a planning team. That was we should take a few staff with, let's call them, contrarian views and get them on the team, and if we convert just 1 or 2 of these guys to our way of thinking, then they'll do the job of converting the other dissenters far better than we ever will. Next we'd explain the objective, more of that in the next slide. Then we look at externally at markets and competitors, risks and opportunities, and then internally at strengths and weaknesses. And then develop the critical things that must be done in order to offset the risks and exploit the opportunities. We call them critical success factors, or CSFs. The CSFs then need to be prioritised, and I'll show you a method for doing that. And in some instances, you may need to break CSFs and other activities into smaller component parts. You'll also need to assign responsibilities for the different activities. Once the outcome of all this work is drafted, it's then a case of sharing it with staff, remembering that you may have been working on this for some time, and you may be excited by it. The people that you're sharing it will usually be cold to it, so don't be surprised if they don't get excited as you. They haven't as much invested, hopefully yet. Finally, remember to celebrate success when key milestones are met. So, what are we trying to achieve? Well, let's attempt to begin with the end in mind. I was reading recently that J.K. Rowling started writing the Harry Potter series books, 6 I think, knowing what the last line in the last book would be. That was her starting point and that was her target. To me, that's an extraordinarily impressive example of starting with the end in mind. Excuse me. The point is, if you do start with the end in mind, you can work back to see what you need to do for each period, be it year, quarter, month or week. So at this point, let's take a bit of a step back and think what we call our end in mind question. The MD of one of our clients, a European manufacturer of air conditioning equipment, called this our killer question. So if we were to hop into Doctor Who's TARDIS and transport ourselves a number of years of your choosing into the future, could be 3, could be 5, could be 10, and if we were having this conversation looking back, and this is the killer question, what has to have happened for you to be happy with progress? Now that's a big question. But it is useful to ask it up front, and it's also useful to get some kind of consensus from the team. So assuming that's done, no small task, let's get to how these tools and techniques are used and how they might drive our thinking. We're going to start with the outside world, and there are really 3 tools as part of this process. PESTLE analysis, which takes a look at things over which you have absolutely no control, but changes in the PESTLE landscape can considerably impact your business, for better or for worse. Porter analysis also addresses issues in your external world, but given that you've got deep pockets, enough money, and long enough time frames, you can change the landscape. SWOT, the more common tool, but the outputs from PESTLE and Porter become the opportunities and threats of SWOT, threats being synonymous with risk. Incidentally, one of the key byproducts of this type of processes is that it makes future decision-making clearer. If an activity or opportunity presents itself and is not in line with the thinking, it can be more easily and quickly rejected. In essence, the process is about using the thinking, the tools and the techniques to help you zero down on your objectives and targets, the things that you need to do to remain successful, thereby offsetting risk and exploiting opportunity. But I can't stress highly enough, this is not a one-size-fits-all process. In a large organisation, that process may involve many people, many teams, and possibly a good few weeks of work. In a smaller organisation, the process may be completed in a couple of afternoons with a couple of people, possibly in a pub. So the first stage of the process is to undertake PESTLE analysis. Let's look a little deeper. Oh, gone too far. PESTLE, which stands for Political, Economic, Sociocultural and Technological, Environmental and Legislative, PESTLE covers decisions and changes made that impact your business, but are made outside of your business and critically over which you have absolutely no control. And one of the key things you'll notice here is there are some very blurred lines between some of the issues. Take political and economic issues. Should interest rates and unemployment come under political or the economic banner? Should changes in legislation come under political or legislative section? The answer is it doesn't matter. The process is not about getting the right issue in the right box. It's absolutely about using the tools to drive your thinking. Obviously, we can't go into all of the different ramifications for each section of the PESTLE, but we are going to explore each individually with a few examples. Additionally, should you want a copy, we do have a checklist detailing a number of sub-criteria of issues you might want to consider under each of the PESTLE sections. This will be on the landing page. Oh, wrong way. So, political. Political factors relate to how the government of the day intervenes in the economy. Political factors might include things like tax policy, trade restrictions, tariffs and political stability. Additionally, governments can have a high impact on health, education and infrastructure, all of which can affect a company to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the sector that they are in. As an example of how to use and abuse these tools, one company importing goods from a variety of, let's say, less stable areas of the world, expanded the political part of the analysis to cover each of the countries it was importing from, analysing things like political stability generally, the different political parties, and their views with regard to the product that the company was importing, and their views on the relevant industry. Economic factors include things like economic growth rates, interest rates, exchange rates, and inflation rates. Factors which can have a considerable influence on how the business operates and makes decisions. For example, interest rates can affect a firm's ability to service debt, and possibly to what extent a business grows and expands. Exchange rates can affect the cost of exporting goods and the supply and the price of importing goods. We do a lot of work in the lift sector with both large and small lift companies, and a lot of lifts are now bought in as complete packages from manufacturers in Italy, Spain and beyond. Going back to before the referendum, the smarter, more astute companies, a number using exactly these models, saw the risk and decided to hedge their currency against potentially large currency fluctuations. Companies that didn't hedge or prepare in other ways found their projects immediately loss-making due to the violent currency swings immediately after the Brexit vote. Sociocultural factors. include the cultural aspects, health consciousness, population growth rate, age distribution, career attitudes, and even emphasis on safety. Trends in social factors can affect the demand for a company's products and how that company operates. For example, the ageing population may imply a smaller and less willing workforce, which increases the cost of labour. As a result, companies may react to change by adopting different strategies. For instance, B&Q is focused on recruiting older workers. One of our contracting company clients used to specialise in the building and fitting out of nightclubs and casinos. As a result of their PESTLE analysis, particularly the sociocultural parts, they saw the writing on the wall with regard to youngsters drinking less, going out less, people having less disposable income, and falling foreign investment in casinos. Looking at the socio-cultural activities in this way encouraged them to put plans in place to diversify away from the nightclub sector and develop into the broader leisure market by targeting restaurants, hotels and sports centres. Technological factors include things like R&D, automation, and the currently in the news rise of the robots. Technological changes like electric and driverless cars will one day have massive effects on society. Many technological factors may change the barriers to entry for new start-up companies. Additionally, shifts in technology are likely to affect costs, quality, and lead to innovation. In fact, we're currently in discussions with a successful training company that produces content for a very specific market and distributes it online. There's no classrooms. There's no full-time trainers, yet the materials are highly regarded and distributed internationally. This operational model would have been unthinkable even just a few years ago, and even today is only possible due to the technological changes completely out of its control. Environmental factors include ecological issues, weather, climate, and climate change, which affects things like tourism, farming, insurance, and the demand for certain products and services. Additionally, a growing awareness of climate change and its impact is having on how companies operate and the products they offer, both creating new markets and diminishing and destroying others. Again, blurred lines, but something like the introduction of city congestion zones and the low and ultra emission zones might be placed under either the environmental section or legislative section. Regardless of where it fits, recent changes in these areas have ripped thousands from the bottom lines of numerous companies. That's obviously before they've recovered and, where they can, pass the cost back to customers. The final part of the PESTLE framework relates to legal factors, which includes health and safety, environmental laws, HR laws, consumer and antitrust laws, all of which affect how a company operates, its cost, and often the demand for products. An example of legal change affecting a whole sector would be the EU-inspired construction product regulations for structural steels. As a result of these changes brought about by the new regulation, we found ourselves working with numerous very small companies that suddenly had to comply with a completely different set of compliance requirements. Another, from the automotive sector, into which we're about to delve, would be the government's desire to ban the internal combustion engine by 2040, possibly sooner. So moving from the high-level issues over which most of us have no control to issues that over time and given sufficient resource we can begin to control, let's move on to the Porter analysis. Over time, all markets shift. At some stages they get more concentrated and others more fragmented. And Michael Porter developed his 5 forces model to highlight the forces that exert pressure on any industry or sector. In the middle is inter-industry rivalry. That's about how hospitable or hostile the marketplace is. At the top and bottom, there's the threat of new entrants and the threat of substitute products. On either side is the power of suppliers and the power of customers. So let's explore each of these components of the model. So for most companies in sectors, the intensity of competitive rivalry is the major determinant of competitiveness. Effectively, we're asking the question, how cutthroat is the industry? having an understanding of the competition is critical to successfully growing a company. And all companies should be aware of their competitors, their marketing and pricing strategy, and they should react to changes made. Other factors that affect competitive rivalry include the relative size of firms within a sector. Is the sector dominated by a small number of big guys, or is there a range of different sized companies? So let's flesh this out using the automotive sector. When I was young, British Leyland, Ford and Vauxhall were the dominant players in the UK automotive market. In terms of new entrants, gradually around the 80s, Honda, Toyota and others entered the market both here and internationally. And they generally built and sold cars in larger volumes, so they were able to reduce price and expand the market. The market then stabilised and the Japanese became part of the established market, eventually squeezing out most of British Leyland, the likes of Triumph and Rover with their less desirable and less reliable offerings. The Japanese have then been followed by other new entrants, for instance the Taiwanese. Tesla is now the new entrant to the market, sending shockwaves through it, not only by introducing batteries and motors as a new means of propulsion, a technology shift, but also now, rightly or wrongly, I think the jury is out, selling online. They've acted as disruptor, and as they have disrupted, others have had to follow, and are now gradually catching up. Essentially, industries that deliver higher returns for the key players within it will inevitably, read unfortunately, attract new firms into that market. Over the longer term, the impact of which will be to decrease the profitability for the incumbent firms, and as a result, the higher the barriers to entry for new players, the longer existing players can continue to make those high returns. So to use a simple example, if you're a window cleaning business, the barrier to entry are very small. All you need is a bucket and a ladder, maybe a van. It does not cost a lot to set up as a new window cleaning business. The barrier to entry are low. Consider the other end of the spectrum. What if you want to take on Unilever with a new Persil type washing powder? Not only do you need a new mega recipe for the washing powder, you also need the kit to make it. Very expensive. You also need an absolutely huge advertising budget, or at least traditionally you would have. The barriers to entry are enormous. Other factors that affect new entrants include things like economies of scale and product service differentiation, and not to be forgotten, the expected retaliation of existing players. Substitute products and services for the automotive sector would include anything from simply walking to a variety of public and private transport provision: buses, planes, trains, taxis. Additionally, and interestingly, Tesla's Elon Musk is also potentially creating a substitute product for part of the sector with his pursuing of the Hyperloop concept. Substitute products will usually use a different approach or technology to solve the same customer requirement. At a basic level, think beer and wine. Not sure why that occurred to me first. Butter or margarine, meat or fish, landlines or mobiles. Taking a purist approach, it's sometimes worth thinking hard about this. Water is a substitute for Coke, but Pepsi, because it's essentially the same, sorry, but it is, it's not a substitute product, but a competitive product. Other factors that affect the threats from substitute products include the tendency of buyers to substitute products, which is influenced by both tangible and intangible factors. For instance, brand loyalty. Think Coke and Pepsi. Contractual and legal barriers can also be effective. Think mobile phones. Relative price of substitutes. Think stairs and lifts. And the cost and ease of switching from one solution to another. Perhaps also the level of perceived or real product differentiation and the number and availability of substitute products in the market. Continue with the automotive market, the bargaining powers of customer can change over time. Who do you think has more bargaining power over the new car salesperson? The person that walks in to buy a car at the beginning of the month or quarter, or the person that walks in to buy a car at the end of the period? Additionally, the power shifts with the economic cycle. So a purchaser will have less power when the economy is booming and compared to when it is sluggish. The bargaining and power of customers is about the ability of the customer to put the company under pressure. The customer power is high if they have numerous alternatives and low if they have only a few. The loyalty programs noted with kind of Costa Coffee and frequent airline programs are mechanisms that companies use to reduce customer power. You don't really want to buy your coffee from Starbucks if you don't have a Costa card. Other factors that affect the bargaining power of customers include the concentration of customers relative to the concentration of providers, bargaining leverage. Can you bargain for your can of beans at Tesco's? Switching costs for the customer, and the availability of both information and the availability of substitute products. The bargaining power of suppliers is essentially the inverse of that of customers. This time it's about the ability of the supply chain to put you under pressure. The electrification of the automotive sector will undoubtedly have an impact on the supply chain and is likely to result in significant shifts in the supplier power. 100 years of established technology and established relationships will probably get written off over the next 15 to 20 years. The balance of power in supplier relationships in that sector will change considerably. So bargaining power of suppliers is high when there are few substitute products and low when there are many. Other factors affecting the bargaining power of suppliers include the concentration of suppliers, the availability of substitute products, supplier switching costs, and the degree of differentiation in the items required. So to summarise, the Porter's model is useful to assess competitive environment that a company operates within to identify changes in any of the above forces that may require the company to reassess the market and its position within it. And the beauty of Porter's is it can provide a tool that allows you to think through things that you can change over the longer term. You can buy competitors, you can buy suppliers, and in doing so, you can change the shape and the dynamic of the market. So the outputs from this and the PESTLE analysis feed into the SWOT, which is where we're going next. The SWOT analysis is probably the archetypal marketing tool and business planning tool. It's been around since the 60s and 70s, so it's pretty battle-hardened, and as such I'm confident that most of you will be familiar with it. Because we've used the PESTLE and the Porter analysis to look at issues external to the organisations, the issues relating to opportunities and threats, they should feed directly into the SWOT analysis. Strengths and weaknesses are about navel-gazing to determine what the organisation is and is not so good at in comparison to its peers. So it's principally concerned with the internal workings of the company. It's predominantly about how the organisation develops and executes strategy and how well it operates as compared to the competition. So some strengths and weaknesses may have also been highlighted by the analysis already undertaken. Alternatively, they may need more teasing out. So let's now work backwards through the SWOT, starting with threats. Threats are elements in the external world that can cause trouble. They might include interest rate increases, changes of government, changes in technology, a dominant player taking over a competitor to become even more dominant. However, like the blurred edges of some parts of the PESTLE, there's also blurring, possibly depending on your mindset, about whether something is an opportunity or a threat. Continue with the automotive sector, the shift in technology from internal combustion engine to electric is probably perceived as a major threat by the currently dominant players. However, there are around 620,000 electric vehicles in the UK, just a fraction of the 35 million cars, and the government wants 20 to 30 million electric cars on the road by 2040. That's only 11 years away. I suspect Tesla might see this as an opportunity. The incumbents might see it as a threat. Having said that, with Tesla being first in the market, it doesn't automatically mean they'll win. Weaknesses are the characteristics of the business that place the business at a disadvantage relative to competition. That might include the cost base, old and ageing plant, equipment, poor customer service. The key weakness of the dominant players in the automotive market is that many of them are on the back foot with regard to the emerging technologies. Their supply chain will need a radical overhaul if they're to remain dominant players in the years to come. Incidentally, whenever we do this, the list of weaknesses as compared to the list of strengths is usually long. And I think that says something about the often pessimistic nature of senior executives. Strengths are the characteristics of the business that give it an advantage over others. Strengths might include image, reputation, cash in the bank, experience. Strengths for the currently dominant players in the automotive market are their long-established relationships. But for someone like Tesla, their strength may be a better understanding of the newer technologies. So let's have a short recap. Where have we got to? We've now looked at issues completely outside of our control using PESTLE. We've looked at things we have a chance of changing using Porter and distilled those key issues down into the SWOT analysis. It's time to take all of this information, percolate it, and decide on the things that we absolutely must do to remain successful and absolutely must do to offset the risks and opportunities afforded to us. It's time to think about critical success factors. CSFs may be a process, they may be something more nebulous. Indeed, they may not be directly manageable. They may even be statements of hope or fear. And in order to signify both collective buy-in and criticality, they would each usually start with the phrase, we need or we must. The key is from the work undertaken to identify possibly 5 to 8 things that you absolutely must do. 8 if you're feeling ambitious and have the necessary resources and organisational slack, and perhaps only 3 or 4 if the objective is survival. The number is important. Related studies have shown that better performing companies will have their management team focused on fewer issues. The more issues there are, the less shared the vision is. Additionally, the list is likely to be a mix of both the strategic and the tactical. But what does that mean in practice? How can we develop this? Fortunately, we're going to use an example. In the example we have here, we've identified 7 critical success factors, but for reasons of brevity, we've only reproduced 4 on this slide. We need best-in-class customer satisfaction levels. We need more business opportunities. We need best-of-breed quality, and we need excellent new product development. We then need to assess the CSFs against key company processes. At Statius, we tend to look at processes in a systematic fashion, starting with what we call the core activity map. Essentially, we think most commercial organisations have just 3 or 4 key processes. It's always more complicated than this, but they are get job, win job, do job, and bill job. For some reasons, the accountants like to add get paid as the 4th process in the sequence. Again, this is not for us to decide. You need to make the sequence reflect the way your work works. However, there are planning activities that sit meta to these core processes, and there are support activities that sit underneath these core processes. They are sometimes equally important, and we need to include those too. So what we're now going to do is prioritise by cross-relating processes to CSFs using 2 matrices in a 2-stage process. This slide is a bit busy, and we'll be expanding it in a moment. But I wanted to give you an overview first. Incidentally, there is a version of this and the following matrix on the landing page. This matrix shows all 7 of the CSFs identified across the top, each CSF being written vertically. It also shows a sample of just 18 processes written down the side, arranged around the get job, do job, bill job framework. There will be other sections to this, and as an example we can see here, the planning and objective setting process has been popped on at the top, and a few typical support processes have been added to the bottom. So if we now expand that matrix, we can see all 7 of the CSFs the detail of which is unimportant, as this is just an example. The process for the prioritisation is to review all of the processes in turn and establish which of them have an impact on the critical success factors, the CSFs. The second stage is then to assign an A to E rating for the quality of the current process performance, where A is good and E is poor. So here we can see that process 1, research the marketplace, affects 4 CSFs and is judged to be executed at an OK level of C, whereas process 3, monitor the competition, affects 6 CSFs and is judged to be executed pretty poorly, so is rated D. In this slide, we've cut to another part of the completed first matrix, and processes 15 and 17 both affect 6 CSFs. Process 15 is given the poorest rating of E, and process 17 is given a slightly better rating of D. But remember, this is just an example. We've summarised with a total of just 18 processes. It's not uncommon to have 30 plus processes, and the processes need to be reflective of the activities you run in your business. We've also summarised at a relatively high level, so you may want to introduce other processes, for instance, people, procurement, health and safety, facilities management. The key is to make it reflective of the processes that are important to you. The next stage is to identify the most critical processes. So what we're trying to do here is identify those processes that are of the poorest quality, typically rated D and E, that affect the most CSFs. In this way, we can allocate precious resource that will give us, to use an Americanism, most bang for our buck. So now we've identified, in our example, process 3, monitor competition, which hits 6 CSFs and has a quality rating of D. Process 15, select and educate and train suppliers, which again hits 6 CSFs and has a quality rating of E. And 17, identify, induct and retrain staff, also hits 6 CSFs with a quality rating of D. These are in the top left-hand corner with the red ring drawn around them. They are the most critical processes, and if we spend time on improving these activities, they will have biggest impact on the largest range of critical success factors, and we will have linked what the organisation needs to do to offset risk and exploit opportunity to processes we can directly manage. Obviously, for your own organisation, we'll have completely different CSFs and completely different processes. So, returning to the initial question, why is this important? The UK FTSE was set up in 1984 with 100 of the then biggest companies. As of last year, only 27 of those original 100 companies remained in the FTSE. The others have been taken over, demerged, delisted, or collapsed. Think Carillion, Woolworths, and MFI. At the other end of the scale, with small firms, recent research has suggested that 60% of small firms fail within 5 years. Many other studies put that number much higher. In both instances, these were not sustainable businesses. If they were not sustainable, big or small, they cannot have been properly and robustly identifying risk nor exploiting opportunities in a way that would have made them viable in the long term. That's why it's important. You don't want to be placing the close sign at your door. Clearly, or inevitably, the process will take time, it will take effort, it will take money and focus. So at this stage, it's probably worth considering what it will do for you, what you'll get in return. That is, apart from survival. The process of adopting a robust and risk and opportunity evaluation framework can bring consistency and clarity to your team's thoughts about the future direction of a company. As you peek into the future, you can use the tools suggested. You can improve your educated guesses. It can provide a means of measuring and monitoring. It keeps you on track. To me, the resulting document is simply paper that collates and clarifies thinking. It's the actions that need to be undertaken that arise from the process and the execution of those that are key. As a result, a key component of the process is improved delegation and the tracking of actions. Additionally, the plan creates a yardstick against which you can measure yourself and others, which in itself creates better buy-in. All in all, it's a pretty solid framework for identifying risk and exploiting opportunities. It simply minimises the difference between what we expect to happen and what actually happens. So we've now been through PESTLE, Porter and SWOT. We've created and prioritised critical success factors in order to percolate out directly manageable processes which will give us the best bang for our effort, all in order to mitigate risk and exploit opportunities with a view to ensuring we are not a casualty of corporate failure. So, a lot of these processes are in concept quite simple, but not necessarily easy to implement. If you're not sure about how to apply this to your organisation, feel very free to contact me and we can chat about how it might work for you. Interestingly or otherwise, the download link to our website, statius.co.uk, has been imaginatively named IRSM website webinar notes with a hyphen between the three words. So just as a final aside, we have one client, an architect of about 80 staff, where a selection of customers and even key suppliers, along with 50% of their staff, are set into teams, each looking at a particular CSF annually. Therefore, half the staff are fully engaged with some part of the annual risk and opportunity assessment as part of developing their business plan. It's hard work, but the buy-in from staff and feedback from customers is phenomenal. Finally, the value of any learning is not how much you did or did not enjoy it, but the value resides in the effectiveness of the actions you now take. As a reminder, our purpose is to help you deliver better strategies, better systems, better measurements, and engage people delivering better results. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been helpful.
Hi Mark, thank you for that presentation. It was really informative with lots of examples of how this all operates in practice. If anyone's got any questions, then please feel free to type those in the chat function now, and we will follow up on those, or you can contact Mark directly. And as you can see, Mark's email address is on the screen right now. I'll send a follow-up email after this webinar to everyone who's attended, and I'll also include the link which is on the presentation screen now, so that you're able to download the webinar notes which Mark has kindly provided. Mark, I've got a couple of questions related to all of this. So first of all, for a small organisation, say with 34 people and a senior team of 4, how would you structure the sessions to work through the PESTLE, etc.?
I'd probably do something like every other week, maybe every third week, half-day sessions. I think the key with this is you need time to think about things and let things percolate through kind of yourself, if you like. So I think if you blitz it, you kind of miss opportunities. Whereas if you gradually do half-day sessions, 2 or 3 hours a piece, tackling the Porter first and then the PESTLE first and then the Porter and then the SWOT, you kind of give yourself a bit of time to kind of live it, really. And as you're in the shower, driving around in the car, things will come up to you,
okay,
or percolate up, which kind of inform the process better.
So you need time to sort of reflect, I guess, and really think it through properly. Yeah. And if an organisation already has a robust and detailed business plan, should they still work through this process from scratch, do you think?
I think there's... I would tend to make these kind of appendices to business plans. And the bit that I like, or we like to put together with business plans, is not necessarily the business plan, because I think the business plan is a bit like going through this process in many respects. the business plan should reflect the thinking, but it's the actions that come out of it that are the drivers. So I would use these, even if you have got a business plan already, to kind of just make sure you're not missing anything. I guess it depends on the degree and the scope of the business plan in the first instance, but I certainly think these are still good tools, and I would, as I say, make them appendices probably.
Okay, brilliant. Right, it doesn't look like we've got any questions coming through at the moment, but as I say, Mark's email address is on the slide at the moment, edwards@statius.co.uk. So if you do have any questions for him, please do get in touch. Mark, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.